Hey guys, my name is Dan and welcome back to another video. First of all, sorry for how long it's taken me to make this video. Since the last video, I actually took a trip to Japan where I saw a lot of trains in real and model form. I picked up quite a few models to use in future videos, including ones that I'm using in this one. I also found a couple super rare items for great prices, so I'm really excited for you guys to see those videos in the future. Anyway, the subject of today's video is the second in our series on the TOMIX N-scaled Thomas & Friends line, that being James, the splendid red engine. After the successful launch of the TOMIX Thomas line in 1998 with the Thomas, Annie, and Clarabelle set, in 1999 TOMIX expanded the range quite a bit. With Season 5 coming out at the time, TOMIX cashed in on this by releasing several new products, including a few buildings, a couple rolling stock packs, some new train sets, and most significantly, James. At the time of release, James retailed for just 7,800 yen, or about $78 at the time, which is an amazingly low price compared to what models cost these days. And he came with two pieces of rolling stock too, not just the engine. With the addition of James and all this new rolling stock, the TOMIX Thomas range became quite big just 1 year after its initial release. But was TOMIX able to improve on the amazing Thomas model they released just 1 year prior? To answer that, let's go ahead and look at the star of TOMIX's 1999, the James and the Troublesome Trucks set. As a special treat, this time we're not just going to be looking at the original 1999 release of James, but also a 2012 version, which is the last year the TOMIX Thomas line existed before it was retired and eventually brought back in CGI. There's a lot of interesting differences between these two boxes that show just how much the Thomas brand evolved over time. The Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends logo has been replaced with the Thomas and Friends logo, and the Britt Allcroft logo is now just a small logo on the back, and it's been joined by the Hit Entertainment logo. For those who don't remember, we used to complain like this was the worst we thought it could get. We used to complain there was too much duck.
It's the Great Western Way!
I have to say I overall prefer the design of the older box with the red and yellow outlines, but that's really just my nostalgia talking. Let me know in the comments which one you guys prefer. Just like Thomas's box, we get a window to see James from the side along with the rolling stock that's been included, a troublesome truck, and a troublesome van. James gets his name printed on the side of the box, but the trucks don't, which is probably part of why they're so pissed off all the time. I really like that the TOMIX models all include some rolling stock with the engines. It really helps to get your collection going. Though I don't think James fits being paired with trucks very well. He looks much better with the red express coaches that come with Henry, so I think the rolling stock should have been swapped. Trucks just makes more sense for Henry with the flying kipper and all that. Opening the box, the models are packaged the exact same way as Thomas was, just in some styrofoam casing. Very safe and easy to repackage. So, with the box out of the way, let's get these models out and see how they compare to Thomas, Annie, and Clarabelle. We're actually going to do things a little out of order this time and look at the trucks first before we look at James. With James, you get a 7-plank open wagon and a box van. All the detail is molded, there's no paint anywhere except the faces, but the faces are spot on to the show. The usual detail is all there, molded on the sides, and there's also molding on the underframes of both trucks, planking inside the open wagon, and even details on the roof of the van. They also have dummy couplers molded with their buffers, and they have the standard Rapido style and scale couplers. Yeah, there's not much to say in terms of detail here, but I'm actually going to make the argument that this is a good thing. It allows these to be cheap enough that they can come included with the James model for seemingly very little to no extra cost. And when they're sold separately, they're sold in multi-packs, so you still get great value there. For something that's meant to be for kids, I much prefer this way of doing rolling stock. The Bachmann Troublesome Trucks would run you about $100 for a train of just 4 trucks. It's like Bachmann can't decide if they're making simple models for kids or premium models for adults. But that's something I'll talk more about in another video. The only criticism I really have about these trucks is that the wheels are plastic like Annie and Clarabelle. The axles at least are metal though. It wouldn't be that much more expensive to make the wheels metal, so I just wish they would do that, but I haven't had any TOMIX rolling stock derail, and they are very free rolling. They rolled off this set a lot during filming. Anyway, let's get on to the main event, James himself. I'm just going to say right from the beginning, this James model is great. The proportions, the lining, everything is there exactly as you'd expect. Starting at the top, James's safety valve is molded along with a feature I've never seen on another James model this size, a separately fitted whistle. Which is broken on my later version of James, so yeah, I can see why most toy manufacturers don't have James's whistle sticking out like this accurate to the show. The boiler features that beautiful gold lining James is known for in the TV series, along with the handrails, which are molded onto the body, unlike the whistle. It's a little weird to have one without the other, but I can see why they would do that. That's exactly where a kid would want to pick James up, which would immediately break the handrails. The cab has open windows so you can see through the front, but inside is used as space for the motor, so there's no cab detail in here. It's understandable at this scale for 1999 especially. Just like Thomas, there's a couple minor differences between the two versions of James, one of which we can see here on the wheels. The 1999 version has completely open spoked wheels, while the later version has silver behind the wheels. The reason for this is actually that the later versions of Thomas and James both use a split chassis design, while the earlier ones just use pickups. We'll talk more about that in the mechanism section, but it is unfortunate that the better running versions of both models have the less accurate looking wheels. Also, just like Thomas, the later James has fatter buffers so they don't fall off as easily. By the way, James's buffers are completely black for some reason, not sure why they did that when they already had Thomas's buffers with the correct colors. Speaking of the front though, James does have a dummy coupler, but no vacuum pipe, lamp irons, or lamp. Thomas at least had a lamp fitted, so I'm surprised that James doesn't have one at all. Same for the back, no lamp and no vacuum pipe. The length of James's running board in particular makes it even more obvious how weird these engines look without those little details. And just like Thomas and the rest of the series, he has the standard Rapido style and scale couplers at the front and the back. As for the face, honestly I think it's pretty perfect. It looks exactly like one of the faces that James wore a lot in Season 1. Granted, we don't see James happy that often, so this face isn't really used that frequently, but TOMIX still did an amazing job recreating it either way. James is the kind of character where I would love to have interchangeable faces, especially an angry face, since he uses that all the time. We would get that with a certain later TOMIX model, but unfortunately it didn't make its debut here. At least this face doesn't have a weird uncanny feeling like the Thomas one does sometimes. There's not much to say about the tender, except that it is pretty much perfect. The coal load and the printed detail both look great, and the underframe detail is exactly what you'd expect. No complaints here, except for the lack of a vacuum pipe on the back, as I mentioned before. The Thomas models in the show aren't that complicated, so they shouldn't be that complicated to recreate in toy form, but we see manufacturers get simple things wrong all the time. I'm glad that the problems here are pretty minor though, because James has unfortunately gotten some of the worst models in history in many different ranges. So it's nice to see a model that hits all the proportions, details, and even the face pretty perfectly. Besides the running board detail, of course. This model is absolutely A+, one of the best Thomas models I've ever seen. Honestly, I would even put his picture on the wall.
But this is one of my favorite pictures. And I have that hanging in my bedroom.
First, we're going to take a look at the mechanism of the 1999 version of James. The body is just pressure fitted with a couple clips at the bottom of the cab. First you pull the cab off, being careful not to make the whistle fall off, and then pull the body off after that. That reveals the inside where we can see the motor, worm drive, pickups, and a pretty big weight. This time the weight is held in by a screw under James's front wheels, so you need to unscrew that if you want to remove the weight for whatever reason. The pickups are on top of the wheels, just like Thomas, and you'll definitely need to open this James up to clean those pickups after owning him for a while. Nothing too complicated here, just a simple and effective mechanism. Just watch those pickups because James won't run well after those get dirty. To get access to the wheels of this one, you actually need to remove the screw under the weight and then remove the weight itself to reveal another screw. I'm not going to do that because I'm scared. Now let's take a look at the updated 2002 version of James's mechanism. First you slide the cab off just like the first one, but then the hard part is removing the main body. See, on the old one, it was just pressure fitted, there were no clips, but now there are clips, and they're really tight on there. It's a pain to get them off, and I actually broke one while pulling this off. so I'd recommend being a lot more careful with those clips than I was. One of the clips for the cab was already broken when I got this James, so I can tell I'm not the first person to struggle with opening this. Inside we can see that James has pretty much the same updated motor as the updated Thomas model that we looked at last time with the flywheel and everything. So this one is obviously going to run better than the last one we just looked at because it has a more updated and robust mechanism. Split chassis models are a little bit controversial, but I've heard that they are a preferred method of picking up power when it comes to N-scale models specifically. I'm not sure why, but it just seems to be more popular in N-scale than it is in other bigger scales like HO scale. It does end up making the models a lot more reliable than using pickups because the pickups get dirty very easily on N-scale models. If we look at the bottom of this James model, we can actually see two screws on the base keeper plate that were not there on the 1999 version. Taking those off reveals something I was not expecting at all. James's wheels are actually held in brass bearings that are placed into square slots, and the wheels are all separately driven. Yes, separate gears running into each of James's wheels here, which is not something that you really want. You only need one to be driven if the coupling rods are good enough to do their job. But the metal brass bearings on these wheels are a really amazing feature that I was not expecting to see on a toy grade model from 2002. Just shows you why there's no reason that every model can't do that these days, but still some don't. I wouldn't recommend opening up this part of James at all unless you really needed to oil the wheels for some reason, because the bearings slide around a lot and they're very hard to get back into place once you've taken them out. Definitely don't do that unless you're adept at dealing with N-scale models. Also, the spring and the coupler for the tender will fall off when you take this off, so be careful of that too to make sure you don't lose the spring. So with the mechanism out of the way, let's go ahead and see how James runs. Like with Thomas, I'm not going to say much about how this model runs, as the oldest ones are about 25 years old at this point. What I can say is that the updated version, released in 2002 and onwards, which is what I'll be running today, runs perfectly. The earlier versions of Thomas and James both stutter a lot, but the later versions run great. The flywheels and brass bearings on the wheels make quite a huge difference. So the central question of this video is this better than the Thomas model released 1 year prior by TOMIX? And to answer that, I would have to say absolutely yes. James doesn't fix every problem I had with Thomas, but there's nothing about it that's worse. The whistle is separately fitted and painted gold, while Thomas's was painted yellow, so James gets a point there. The face is accurate and not creepy, so there's another point over Thomas. There's no major flaws to be seen anywhere on the model besides the running board detail, and that's standard across the whole line. So yeah, I'd say this is definitely an improvement over Tomix's Thomas model. If you see this model for a decent price, I'd definitely recommend picking it up, but I'd suggest not going over about $150, although you can probably find it for cheaper than that if you look hard enough. I do want to mention that there's also the CGI version, which is the same as the updated 2002 and onwards version, except for the face. I'd say there's no reason to pick up the original 1999 version of James unless you're a TOMIX completionist like me. But I can definitely recommend the updated version for anyone who collects Thomas models in N-scale. Anyways guys, that's going to be about it for today's video. I want to say thanks for the amazing response to my last video. It really made the effort I put into it feel worth it. I have more videos coming in the future, so be sure to keep an eye out for those. Anyways guys, thank you all for watching. Be sure to comment, like, subscribe, rate, favorite, share, +1, anything else you can do on YouTube, and I will see you later.